Good morning. Glad you joined us today, and just wanted to take a couple of minutes today. Of course, there's holiday, all kinds of holiday news around, and people are busy planning time with family. And hope you, on purpose, express your gratitude to your family. Be good to each other. Don't fight over Christmas cookies and how to cook the turkey. And what a blessing if you've got family, just love them and let's be good to each other. Holidays, a lot of decisions, how much money to spend and who to buy a gift for and where to go and how much time do we spend where. And just don't let the holidays become a time of conflict. Let it be a time of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Remember that statement, but it was peace. It's because the goodwill is from God toward man. Doesn't mean men are going to like each other, but um, that's on purpose. Maybe a little planning. I have often over the years given some holiday hints for survival, and the word plan helps. And again, ask. Why not prefer one another and ask how would you like this done, or what would you prefer, or and don't just let a trip happen. Let's go to grandma's. Well, going to grandma's or going to aunt and uncles or whatever. How long are we going to stay? Where are we going to stay? And think through those things and get them planned ahead of time. And if there was tension the last time, then maybe shorten the stay a little bit or rearrange something. We were in a family member's home many years ago. My oldest is nearly 40, and he was 5, 6 years old, and there was a relative who the boy, a few years older than our son, had some pictures on the wall in his room that I didn't approve of. And so I just I didn't say anything out loud to anybody, but I said to him, I said, just don't go in his room. And we can still love people and we can create some boundaries. And if he said, hey, let's go in your room, then, just no, we'll just stay out here and let's go in the yard or let's play in the living room or whatever. But create some boundaries. You don't have to hate people and throw fits and then we can get along. And if you wanted ham and your spouse wanted turkey, then I'd suggest you have ham and turkey, and or go buy a bunch of trout, and no one will be happy with that. Nobody does trout for Christmas dinner, but make the holidays a good time. Don't try shopping for 18 straight hours with your toddlers. That's a way to have the world come to an end. And just go through the holidays preferring one another. Philippians 2, such a great passage on preferring one another and honor preferring one another. Great truths there. Hey, excuse me. Wanted to mention a couple of thoughts in Genesis chapter 17. If you'd like to look at a verse or two with me, Genesis chapter 17, while most of us are enjoying holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's a lot of people in the Middle East whose world's turned upside down, a lot of fighting, death, loss of life. And I want to just address a little bit this land of Israel. Now, I taught a series on it. I've got a couple of books on it. I've got one book is the title something like The Most Deadly Piece of Dirt. Another one, A Sacred Piece of Dirt. That little tiny piece of land called Israel, and how people have fought over it over the years and fought and centuries of battles. And one country had it, then another country had control of it. And the Jews were, of course, scattered and back again 1948, and they became a nation. They were coming back long before 1948. But the history of Israel and that piece of dirt is pretty phenomenal history. And America's had enough sense to side with Israel throughout most of Israel's history, since Israel became a nation. And that's a smart thing. Genesis 12 said, I'll bless them that bless you, and I'll curse him that curseth you. And we don't want to get on the side that's trying to destroy Israel. We got a bunch of politicians, they're bent on it, and they're crazy. You do not want God mad at us. Now God may whip the fire out of Israel himself, but don't you whip them, or God will whip you. And in fact, many of the nations God used in the Old Testament to punish Israel, when the punishment was done, then he whipped them. And a lot of the prophets are dealing with God's judgment on these people who went overboard in their killing of Israel. And so, in any case, in Genesis 17, I just want to take a moment to address one little principle: is that piece of dirt called Israel. And so, in Genesis 17, when Abram was 99 years old, Abraham was 90 years old and 9. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect, and I will make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. Now, so there's a covenant he promises. There's a covenant. A covenant is like a business deal. It's a sacred thing. Now, the word covenant is repeated over and over and over in this chapter, and I don't know if I've counted it, but I'm going to say at least it does. I got them circled here. At least a dozen times in chapter 17, the word covenant's mentioned, and God says, "I'm going to make a covenant with you, and first of all, you're going to be my people, and I'll be your God." And God says to Abraham, "This is a covenant between you and between me and your children, your seed." And that is a very simple, clear-cut statement. I go down to verse 7. He says, "And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God to thee and to thy seed after thee." And so we see this is a promised covenant between God and Abraham and his children. Now remember, Abraham and Sarah couldn't have any children. They go to Egypt, come back with a servant, excuse me, Hagar. And Sarah talks Abraham into having Hagar be his substitute wife, and they have a child, Ishmael. Ishmael, according to the book of Romans and the book of Galatians, Ishmael was not the promised seed. Isaac was later. Ishmael was the child of the flesh. Ishmael was the earthly child that literally pictured the law, where Isaac pictured grace and a lot of spiritual things in there. But in the literal story, Abraham and Sarah, Sarah's got one child, Isaac, and Abraham has two boys, Isaac and Ishmael. And let's just be real clear on this thing. If you look at verse 8, "And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein," notice the word land, "the land wherein thou art a stranger, and all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession." That land, it belongs to the Jew. It doesn't belong to Hamas. It doesn't belong to the Palestinians. It doesn't belong to the Arabs. It doesn't belong to the Egyptians. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's not a Muslim piece of dirt. It's a Jewish piece of dirt. And God made an everlasting covenant on that piece of dirt there. And so if you go down to verse 17, he says, then Abraham, verse 19, "And God said, Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac." So Isaac's not been born yet. "And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him." Now, when God first promised that child, Abraham said, "Oh no, I'm old, Sarah's old. Just bless Ishmael, and it'll be okay. Just bless Ishmael." Well, God heard that prayer, because in verse 20, he says, "As for Ishmael, I've heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and I'll make him fruitful, and I'll multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But," verse 21 of Genesis 17, "but my covenant will I establish with Isaac." Period. That is the end of the subject. Ishmael is the father of the Arab races. Ishmael we could attribute with Islam. And most Islamic people trace their heritage back to Abraham, just like the Jews do, only it splits. Isaac and Ishmael both trace back to Abraham. And God says, "Yeah, I'm gonna make Ishmael a great man, and he'll have 12 sons, and he'll be richly blessed. But my covenant, that's going with Isaac and with his seed." And down this train, this is where the Messiah is going to come, and this is where the Word of God is going to come, and this is where redemption is going to come, and there's a promise. And so it makes these very, very clear promises in verse 21. Again, "But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto him at this time," that's at this set time in the next year. Ishmael doesn't get in on that covenant, not even a little bit. Now, the description of the land, if you want to follow, like in the time of Solomon and David, different times, David is reclaiming land and Solomon is claiming land. And the covenant land, in some descriptions, goes all the way from Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea all the way east to the Euphrates River. And that would be Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia and all that land, all the way back to Egypt and to Israel. Here, I think it's being a little bit more specific, because he calls it the land of Canaan. But But the fact is, it's Israel's. This land belongs to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's 12 sons, and there's no debating it. That land belongs to them. No Palestinian, no Arab, no people of any kind have any, even the slightest little finger of chance to get in on that covenant. Now, there's a bunch of crazies that theologically say that the Jews made God so mad he threw them out, and he took the New Testament church, and all these Old Testament covenants are ours. And oh, they get their doctrine so messed up when they start doing that. Well, for one, I don't plan on inheriting a piece of dirt between the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. I plan on inheriting a heavenly city made of gold where the river of life is. And there's no way I want in on that. I also don't want in on the tribulation, which is called the time of Jacob's trouble. It's not the time of the bride's trouble. We are the bride. We are espoused to him as a chaste virgin. Israel is they're people of God. They're his national children. He has a relationship with them as his people. He has a relationship to us as his bride. And this, you start hearing people talk about covenants and that we get in on the Old Testament covenants. No, those covenants, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. The law and the prophets were until John. The law and the prophets came by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. There is a line, a dividing line clearly set. Now, if you're not familiar with the ideas of covenants, if you go to our YouTube channel, I don't believe it's on Rumble, but on our YouTube channel, I always prefer to use Rumble if I can, because they believe in freedom of speech. But on our YouTube channel, there is a series on Wednesday nights on covenants. If you're not familiar with it, just simple things. God made a covenant with Noah, and then God made a covenant with Abraham, and then one with David and Moses, and then with David, and then Jesus said, I've got a new covenant. And then a little later on, he says, I've got an eternal covenant. And so covenants are just how it's not a time period, it's how God chooses to deal with things. It's like maybe a trust. If I die, everything goes to my wife. If my wife and I both die, now somebody's got to come in and work that trust out to figure out who gets what and what goes where. And that's what a covenant is. It's how things are going to be dealt with in a certain situation. And so anyway, you can get more of that later. But the point is today, I just want to talk about the land. In the book of Judges, of course, you go through the wilderness wanderings, and they cross in after the 40 years in the wilderness, and they cross into the land of Canaan, and Joshua conquers the land. Basically, there's still a lot of work to be done, but they were subdued. And then we come to the book of Judges. And for 440 years, the book of Acts talks about the time of the judges. You know, aren't we something? We just can't hardly wait a week. And they were hundreds of years down in Egypt and hundreds of years in the time of the judges, and they were years of wandering in the wilderness, and then there were years over in captivity in Babylon. And at one point, God said to Moses, "Hey, look, why don't we just start over? And we'll just kill everybody, and I'll start over with you." And I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of work to get it all started. God's not in a hurry. God's eternal. And sometimes I think some of our worries and frustration come because we're really concerned about now, and we're concerned about right now, what's going to happen now. And God says, just relax. I've got everything covered. And but I'm the first one to worry, and you probably don't have any of those worries. But in Judges chapter 2, during the time of the judges, notice this simple statement. He says in Judges 2:1, the angel, the angel of the Lord came from Gilgal to Bosham and said, "I made you to go up out of Egypt." So they were there hundreds of years in Egypt, "and have brought you into the land which I swear to your fathers." And so that's into the land of Canaan. "And I said, I will never break my covenant with you." Never, 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 never. Now, God may see fit to, in punishment of Israel, to run them off into captivities, scatter them around the world, and let the Ottoman Empire, that's Turkey, let different countries kind of take care of that land or abuse the land or neglect it. But that land, it belongs to the Jew, and it's going to be the Jews forever. Don't make any mistake. If ever remember back in 1948 and then again, and I think it was 67, when the every Muslim in the world, basically in that area of the world, they all came down that poor little country of Israel, and we're going to push you guys right off into the ocean. There won't be a Jew left. Well, you know how that worked twice, and it didn't work at all because the land belongs to the Jews. And it's not about Arabs fighting Jews. This is about God. And Hamas isn't going to win. And now God may see fit to have all kinds of things happen. He let the Holocaust happen. He let a lot of hurt happen along the way. But you can be sure of this: if the world, and by the way, in the end, the very end, every nation in the world is going to come down on Israel, and God's going to nuke them all, and it's nothing going to be left but Israel. He's going to wipe out all those armies. You could drop every atomic bomb in the world on Jerusalem, and that land would belong to the Jew, and the Jew would survive because God is sovereign and God is almighty. And that land's a Jewish land, and you can trust him. Now, I want to encourage you, as you read through your Bible, notice the word land as it pops up. And you'll see it throughout the Old Testament, the land. The prophets will talk about it, and the promise of the land, and the covenant for the land, the land, the land, the land, the land, the land. And these Jews, all the way up to the time of the disciples, they were looking for a king. That was the promise that came from the Davidic covenant. And they were looking for a land, and that came from Abraham's covenant. And you can trust that God is going to take care of the land and the people.